At a grand mansion filled with glittering chandeliers and the aroma of a birthday cake, a young girl sat in silence. She was the daughter of one of the richest CEOs in the city, yet on her birthday, not a single child came. Confined to her wheelchair, her eyes carried a quiet sadness that no luxury could erase. But just when it seemed she would blow out her candles alone, a boy no one expected stepped forward. A boy judged for the color of his skin. What happened next would shatter prejudice and leave everyone speechless. The mansion was alive with the glow of golden lights, tables draped in velvet, and a birthday cake carefully decorated with colorful frosting and candles. Everything about the celebration was perfect, or at least, it was supposed to be. For the CEO, a man admired for his power and wealth, this was meant to be a day to show the world that his daughter was loved and celebrated. He had spared no expense, hiring entertainers, decorating the halls, and preparing endless plates of food. But the most important thing was missing: the laughter of children. The invitations had gone out weeks in advance, and yet not a single classmate from his daughter's school came. Parents had politely declined, children had made excuses, but deep down everyone knew the truth. The girl was different. Her wheelchair, her quietness, her inability to run and play like the others made her an easy target for whispers, pity, and avoidance. She sat there in her lavender dress, a crown of delicate flowers in her hair, waiting. Her little hands rested on her lap, her eyes fixed on the birthday candles that seemed to mock her loneliness. Around her, adults murmured awkwardly, some pretending to be busy, others avoiding her gaze altogether. The CEO tried to keep a composed smile, but his heart was breaking. All his money, all his power, and yet he couldn't buy the one thing his daughter wanted most: friendship. And then, just as the silence in the room grew heavier, the sound of small footsteps echoed against the marble floor. Everyone turned their heads. A boy was walking toward her. He carried no expensive gift, wore no fine clothes, but what he carried in his heart was far greater than anyone could imagine. The boy stepped into the center of the room, holding a small, neatly wrapped box in his hands. His gift was not grand, not covered in glittering ribbons or shiny wrapping, but it was chosen with thought and care. He stood there quietly, looking at the girl who sat so still in her wheelchair, her eyes downcast. At first, there was a silence that seemed to stretch forever. Some of the adults frowned in confusion. Whispers began to circulate across the room. Who was this child? He wasn't from the wealthy families that the CEO often entertained. His clothes were simple, his shoes worn, and his skin color stood out sharply among the pale faces in the hall. The contrast was undeniable, and with it came the unspoken judgment that floated through the crowd. The CEO watched carefully. He had not seen this boy before, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet courage that held his attention. The girl finally looked up. Her sad gaze met his, and for the first time that day there was a flicker of life in her expression. He approached slowly, as if to give her a chance to turn away. But she didn't. Instead, she sat a little straighter, waiting. The boy extended his small gift with both hands. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a power greater than all the decorations, the music, and the expensive food combined. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably, others muttered under their breath. Their prejudice was sharp and undeniable. The sight of a black boy standing before the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the city did not sit well with them. It was as though kindness from him was somehow less valuable, as though his presence did not belong, but the girl didn't see it that way. She reached out with trembling fingers, accepting his gift as though it were the most precious treasure she had ever been given. And in that moment her sadness seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile but unmistakable smile. The room was still, and yet charged with tension. Some glared at the boy, others shook their heads in disbelief. But the CEO, he kept watching. He could see that his daughter's happiness, something no amount of wealth had been able to secure, was finally within reach, brought to her not by status or luxury, but by the simple compassion of a child who had nothing to give but his heart. Little did anyone know that small act of courage was about to change everything. The silence broke suddenly, not with applause, not with joy, but with a cruel laugh from the back of the hall. One of the guests scoffed loudly, shaking his head. Others followed with whispers, smirks, and disapproving glances. The atmosphere grew heavy, poisoned by prejudice. "How pitiful," someone muttered under their breath. The words weren't loud, but they cut deep. The boy froze, his small hands trembling. He had done nothing but show kindness, and yet the room turned against him. His courage, so pure and innocent, was being mocked. He looked at the girl again, searching, unsure if he had made a mistake. But she did something no one expected. She held the gift to her chest as though it were priceless. And then, with determination that surprised even her father, she looked around at the crowd, the same crowd that had abandoned her, the same crowd that judged the boy. And her voice trembled as she spoke. "Thank you." 2 words, soft but powerful. The hall grew even quieter. Her eyes welled with tears. But they were not tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of finally being seen, not by the wealthy guests who had ignored her, but by the one child who had dared to care. The CEO's heart pounded in his chest. For months he had tried everything, therapy, doctors, expensive gifts, to bring joy back to his paralyzed daughter's life. Yet here it was, delivered not by power or privilege, but by the hand of a boy society deemed unworthy. The crowd shifted, uncomfortably, but they could not ignore what they were witnessing. For the first time that day, the girl smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up her pale face. And at that moment, the CEO realized this boy was not just a guest. He was the reason his daughter's spirit had awakened again. The tension in the room was unbearable. Everyone was forced to face a truth they did not want to see, that kindness has no color, and compassion cannot be bought. The room stood still, frozen in a silence that carried more weight than 1,000 voices. The CEO, once proud, once surrounded by powerful men and women, felt his throat tighten. For all his wealth, for all his prestige, he had failed to give his daughter what this boy had freely offered: dignity, joy, and the feeling of being cherished. The guests shifted uneasily in their chairs, suddenly ashamed of their absence, their excuses, their judgment. But shame, once delayed, rarely heals the wound it caused. The truth was clear. None of them came for her. None of them showed her she mattered. Except him, the boy, a child who had nothing to gain. No social standing, no wealth, no favors owed. Just a heart big enough to see past her wheelchair, past the empty seats, past the silence of abandonment. He had seen her, not as a CEO's daughter, not as a paralyzed girl, but as a human being deserving of love. The girl's smile grew, trembling but alive. For the first time since the accident, she lifted her chin with pride, no longer hiding behind sadness. The gift cradled in her hands became a symbol, not of pity but of connection. She was not invisible anymore. She was not forgotten. And as she looked at the boy, her spirit found a voice again, not through grand speeches, not through rehearsed words, but through a simple truth. Someone cared. Her father watched with tears blurring his vision. All his life he had been taught that respect was earned through success, that love was measured in status, that people gathered around wealth, like moths to a flame. But in that moment, as he saw his daughter glowing with happiness, he realized the cruelest truth. Money could buy everything but humanity. The boy had given him something his empire could not. He had reminded him that compassion is the rarest form of power, and kindness once shown can change a life forever. When the party ended, many left in silence, avoiding eye contact, their faces marked by guilt. But the boy walked out with his head high, unaware that he had just shifted the course of not only one girl's life but of every soul in that room. Because that day he broke the lie that race, status, or wealth decides the value of a person. The truth stood undeniable. Love is the greatest equalizer. And so I ask you, in a world still divided by walls of prejudice and silence, how many more birthdays, how many more lonely hearts will be left waiting before someone dares to simply ask, "Can I?"